And we got about 3 inches of snow overnight. Then it warmed up and started raining and warmed up quite a bit, and it was a nasty sloppy mess out there. The forecast says it's supposed to stay warmish and rainy for the next day, all day today and tomorrow, and then get cold again. So that would have left a heck of a mess out there. I went ahead and got the bobcat and scraped the snow down. Of course, I can't get it all the way down. Ground's still soft. If I try to get too much, I'm just going to scrape off all my driveway. But I scraped the snow off, got that cleaned up. So hopefully this warm weather and the rain will melt it all off down to bare ground before it freezes up again, and we won't quite have the mess we had the last couple of days with that icy crap on top of everything. Well, I just come up, took all the clamps and stuff off the glue up there. I'm glad I didn't try to glue that melamine down to that MDF without sanding that melamine down first. There are places where the glue spilled out onto the melamine there onto the top. That glue just popped right off there. It didn't stick to it any at all, so that wouldn't have been a very good successful glue up if I hadn't scraped all that melamine down on the back side of that. But it looks like it glued up pretty good. I was just cleaning up the edges and stuff on it a little bit, cleaning up some of the splooge. I stuck a chisel in between the two pieces and I couldn't get them to budge. I couldn't get them to part at all, so that looks like it's going to work out okay. So now I've got to trim it up to its final dimension. I think I'll probably set up the 10-inch radial arm saw for a rip cut. This front edge here, that one is pretty good clean edge, and that'll be my registration edge, so I'll put that against the fence and trim the other side down. And of course the other side is meant to be trimmed down because that MDF was about 25 inches wide and the melamine was 24 inches wide, so the MDF sticks out an inch past the melamine anyway. And I think that's probably about 54 inches, 52 inches or 54 inches. I kind of had a rough plan of 48 inches. So the edges of it, I might probably maybe trim those down. I'm not sure yet. I kind of like that wide table. That gives it a lot more support for wider material. Does make it a little bit hard to handle and takes up a lot of area, but if it's usable that way. So I guess the next thing to do would be to rip that down to the final dimension, and then I get it set up there on that saw stand, and then I've got to drill holes, the mounting holes in it and stuff for it to bolt it down. Once I get that done, then I'll worry about making the secondary tables. But for now, I'm pretty happy with the way that turned out so far. As I said, I've got the table set up for an outfeed, and to get the widest cut possible on it, I have to move the fence. There's 3 positions for that fence. The first position is between the main table and the secondary table, and then there's a third table on the outside of that the clamps clamp down on to clamp the fence down with. And then the final position, the inside feed position, is inside the third table, the third extension. But I don't have the third extension. I just have a board there that is thicker than what my tabletop is, so that really won't work. And then the other thing that happens if you go all the way in like that, then the clamps go on the fence, and the fence, if it had a hardwood fence, oak or something like that, it'd probably stay stiff enough that it'd be tight. But I don't have the oak fence. I've just got a piece of spruce or something there for a fence, and it's kind of flexible, so if you have that in there with just the clamps against the fence, then the fence can have a tendency to bow. But I didn't need it all the way in. I just put it in on the back side of the secondary table. I can make a 25-inch cut on that, but of course I only need a 23-inch cut. The problem with having it inside the third fence instead of outside the third fence is my gauges on the saw. You look up there on the top of the arm of the saw, there's gauges on there to tell you where the blade is, and so the gauges aren't right on that if the fence is in the secondary position. But I never count on the gauges anyway. I always measure it to the blade with a tape measure. Well, on the table, on the radial arm saw, the main part of the table that's critical is the back face of the main table. You want that to be perpendicular to the arm of the radial arm saw, of the travel of the cut when you're making a crosscut cut on there. You want it perfectly 90 degrees or perpendicular to that. But I also use the front face of the table, as I use that quite a bit to resaw my flitches. And when I do that, I'll put a guide board with one good edge on it, and I'll screw that down to the flitch, and then I'll run that across the front of the table right there and use that as a fence. And then the second cut, I can go against the regular fence on it there. So I'm going to want both of those perfectly parallel with each other. So that's not going to be a problem the way I'm going to do this, because I'm going to use this outside edge, or this one long edge with melamine on it, as my reference point. That'll go across the fence, and that'll make the cut edge here that'll go on the inside of the table, that'll make it perfectly parallel with the front edge of the table. So those will be both perfectly parallel. So when I line that table up, if I get the back edge of it lined up correctly on the cabinet, then the front face will be right too. Oh, I got my saw set up, and I've got my shop vac hooked up to it for dust collection. Working on getting this table lined up here and set up on this cabinet, and there's 3 holes in the brackets on this on each side, and there's plus 1 in the middle. Figuring out how to get this thing lined up, first thing I did was I measured how wide this table is, and then I drew center lines on the cabinet itself, on the arm of the radial arm saw, or the post of the radial arm saw. I run a center line up that, and another one in the front of the cabinet, and then lines on the table, so I could line it up and get that thing centered on the table. Then trying to figure out how far out to put it was another question. So I came over here to the 10-inch saw, and I measured out from the back of the main table to the center of the first hole, and that was 1.5 inches. So I measured 1.5 inches from the hole on the brackets there, and then I put a couple of clamps on there. I put a clamp on each side so that the point of the clamp was right on the mark on 1.5 inches. Put the table on that, and then eyeballed down the center line and adjusted it till I got it centered. So that should be where I want it. Now I'll get a sharp pencil and mark those hole locations, and then I'll drill one of them out. I don't know, we'll see. I'm not sure yet what I'm doing. I was going to say I was going to drill 1 out, or maybe drill 2 out, and then mark the other holes again and drill those out. Like I said, I got to make the holes just slightly oversized so we've got some room to adjust that table and get it squared up on there once I get it mounted up. Should be pretty close to being square right now. Alright, I got those holes marked. So what I'll do is I'll pilot those out with a small drill bit, and then I'll get Forstner bits and drill the counter bore, and then after I drill the counter bore, then I'll drill the holes for the bolts. So I got to get everything lined up now. And I'm not very good, I don't have a very good eye for cutting things square or straight, but I got to thinking, and I've got this jig right here. I've had it for years. I don't know whether I bought this or whether it's something that I inherited or somebody bought for me. I don't think I've ever used it. You can see it's like a mini drill press. It's got a drill chuck in here, put the bit in, and then drill motor attaches here. There's a shaft through here that transfers power from the drill press down to the drill motor down to the drill, and then some arms here. There's an adjustment down here for angle if you want to go for different angles. There's actually V-grooves in here for putting pipe and stuff on there and drilling pipe. And it's got holes in here where you can actually screw it down to whatever you're drilling to make sure you get it in the right spot. Well, anyway, I'm going to use that, and I've got a small drill bit in here that I'm going to use to pilot the holes with. Now, ordinarily, I would put something underneath there, a block underneath there, to keep from blowing that hole out the bottom when I go through the bottom. But a small drill bit is not going to make a very big blowout on the other side. The other side is actually going to be the top. But I'm going to go down from the top then with a Forstner bit to counterbore the holes. So that's going to take care of any chip out or anything from these holes. If I drill this out the full 1/4 inch or the larger size than the 1/4 inch to start with, then there's no pilot. The hole is too big for the pilot on the Forstner bit when you go to do a counterbore, and then the Forstner bit winds up walking all over the place and making a mess. So anyway, hopefully this will work. I'll slide this down a little bit so that I'm not going into the metal, and we'll see how this works. I didn't find the chuck for this. I didn't look very hard. So we'll see if that bit stays. Get that thing centered. That looks pretty good. Well, I misdrilled this center hole. Everything else lines up perfect, but I misdrilled this center hole. I made my mark on there where the end of this bracket was, and then flipped this over, and I measured the wrong way from where I made my mark. I measured out, well, actually when I flipped it over I measured in, which would have been the right way, but since this was flipped over it was the wrong way. It was the opposite of what it should have been. So I had to drill a new hole. I got that all done. Now I got a great big center hole in here, which will fill up with sawdust, but everything lines up now. I just tried my screw, and I was wondering about whether I was going to get new screws or not anyway, because these are a little bit rusty, but they don't go all the way through. This tabletop, of course, is quite a bit thicker than the one that was probably on there originally, and these don't quite go all the way through, so I'm going to have to go down and get new screws. And what time is it? It's 3 o'clock, so I got time to go down and get them today, and then I can get this bolted down. Otherwise, this turned out pretty good. I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out. It's going to be a pretty nice table. Now it's a little bit high here because it's up on that roller stand that my granddaughter made. And once that gets down on the floor, then this table will be about 4 inches lower than what it is now. At least 4 inches lower. I've got the screws in the table. Went to town and got the screws. Got that all mounted up on the table now. I swung the arm around. See, there's a little bit of play in that arm. I probably should tighten that up a little bit. Anyway, the next step on this is to square the table up with the travel of the saw. And the way you do that is put a framing square on the trailing edge back here, put it up against the saw, and run the saw back like this and forward, and I can see that it's not quite square. This edge needs to go that way a little bit, or that edge needs to come this way a little bit. So it's still not square. So now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to check my framing square for square. And the way you do that is put the framing square up against a known edge, like this edge right here. Let's see what we got here. Yeah, put it up against this edge right here. I know that edge is straight. And put that up against there like that. Oh, come on, stay there. It's slippery. Slippery little bugger. Alright. Now draw a line, pencil line down the main line, and then take the square and put it over on the opposite side and run it up against there. I'm going to do it again over here on this edge, just to make sure I had my pencil in the right spot. I got my pencil against the square, same spot all the way down. Well, that shows as it being square there. So my square is square. You see my table, the blade runs out, touches right there, but when I go in there, there's about 1/8 of an inch, a little less than 1/8 of an inch. So yeah, I've got table's not square there with that travel of the blade, but I can adjust this. See, that goes over that way just a little bit. If I bump that, I need to adjust that. I have to adjust it in the arm here. So I'm going to have to go dig out the instruction manual again to see how to adjust this, and I got to tighten that up. That's too much slop in that arm right there. Shouldn't be any slop in it, not with it locked up like that. I got to go dig out the manual and look in that to see how to adjust that arm to square that up with the table. Because the table is square. I've got the marks that I made on these brackets here, and the back of that table just lines up just perfect with those. Anyhow, that's it. That table is mounted up there, so I'm happy with that. I think that's going to be a nice table. Trim these edges up a little bit. But anyway, now what I got to do is I got to make my extension table. My back table is back here. Well, I've got this piece of MDF and a piece of melamine. That was left over, and it's too short to make my secondary table. So what I'm going to have to do is cut my table pieces here, an MDF and a melamine, then I'll cut a second piece the same size of both of these, and I'll overlap them. I'll put one piece, a short piece of melamine over here on this side, and the long piece of MDF glued to it here underneath, and then a short piece of MDF on this side to make a continuous piece. Not going to buy any more stuff.